She smirked. Someday you'll understand why I chose someone more successful. I calmly returned her house key and walked away. 11 months later, she found my interview playing on every television inside the airport departure lounge. The key made almost no sound when I set it down. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not the smirk. Not what she said. Just how quiet it was, like returning a house key was something you could do without disturbing the room. Someday you'll understand why I chose someone more successful, Vanessa said. She wasn't yelling. That's what people don't get when I try to explain this to anyone. Marcus, my mom, the two co-workers who eventually asked why I seemed different that fall. Vanessa never raised her voice in 3 years. She smirked instead. Small, controlled, like she'd rehearsed it, or maybe she hadn't rehearsed anything at all, and it just came that naturally to her by then. I looked at the key ring for a second. I slid the apartment key off and set it on the kitchen counter, next to the fruit bowl she kept full of lemons nobody ever ate. Okay, I said. That was it. That was my whole response to 3 years. She looked almost disappointed that I didn't say more, like she'd been waiting for an argument she could win. I didn't have one. I had a duffel bag already packed in the trunk of my car, because some part of me had known for 2 weeks this was coming, even if I hadn't let myself admit it out loud. I want to tell you, I walked out of that apartment feeling something powerful. Rage, grief, anything with a shape to it. Mostly I just felt tired, the kind of tired that sits behind your eyes. I remember the hallway carpet was the same ugly shade of beige it had always been. I remember the elevator took forever. I remember standing in the parking garage for a full minute before I could make myself put the key in the ignition, not because I was crying, but because I genuinely couldn't remember, for a second, where I was supposed to drive. 11 months later, I was standing in the C concourse of Denver International Airport with a boarding pass in my hand, watching my own face on 6 different television screens at once, and Vanessa Cole was standing 40 feet away from me, frozen, watching the same thing. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I'll get there. I promise I'll get there. But it doesn't mean anything if I skip the part where I was nobody. So let me back up. 3 years before any of that, I met Vanessa at a barbecue my friend Marcus dragged me to, the kind where somebody's cousin is grilling too much chicken and everyone's standing around a cooler pretending the Broncos still have a chance that season. She was arguing with a guy named Todd about whether Denver's housing market was going to crash, and she was right, and she knew she was right, and she wasn't rude about it. She was just certain in a way I found unfairly attractive. You're staring, she told me later, not the same night, maybe the 3rd time we hung out. I'm listening, I said. You can do both, I guess. That was Vanessa. Precise. A little sharp at the edges, but warm underneath it if you were patient. She worked in commercial real estate, still junior back then, still driving a Civic with a check engine light she ignored for 2 years. I was doing supply chain analysis for a mid-sized distribution company, making decent money, nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to brag about either. For a long time, none of that mattered. I remember the first winter, both of us broke enough that date night meant splitting a rotisserie chicken from King Soopers and watching bad Netflix documentaries under one blanket in my old apartment, the one with the radiator that clanked all night. She used to fall asleep on my shoulder around 10 and wake up mad at herself for missing the ending. She kept a coffee mug at my place, blue with a chip on the handle, and got weirdly possessive if I let anyone else use it. That's my mug, she'd say, only half joking. It's a mug, Vanessa. It's my mug. I gave her a key to my apartment after 8 months. She gave me one to hers a few weeks after that. We didn't talk about moving in together yet, but the keys felt like the beginning of that conversation, sitting quietly in both our pockets, waiting. I loved her plainly back then. Not dramatically, just plainly, the way you love something you assume will still be there next year. The crack, when it came, didn't look like a crack. It looked like a promotion. Vanessa got moved up to a senior associate role about 2 years in, working under a broker named Diane who wore blazers that cost more than my monthly rent and talked about closing strength like it was a personality trait. The new job came with a real bump in salary, a company laptop that looked nicer than mine, and a group of co-workers who went out for expensive dinners on Thursdays that Vanessa slowly started attending. I was happy for her. I want that on the record. I drove to her office the day she got the news and brought a bottle of champagne we drank out of coffee mugs because neither of us owned actual champagne glasses. To Senior Associate Cole, I said. Shut up, she said, grinning into her mug. It was good. For a while, it stayed good. The dinner where I first felt it happen was at a restaurant called Burlo Grill. somewhere Diane had picked for a team celebration that somehow expanded to include partners. I wore the one blazer I owned. Vanessa's coworker Ben ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my car payment, and everyone laughed about it like that was a normal thing to laugh about. Somewhere between the second course and the dessert menu, Diane turned to me with the kind of polite interest people use when they've already decided the answer won't interest them. So what is it you do again? Supply chain analytics. I work for a distribution company out in Aurora. Oh, that's interesting, she said, and moved the conversation somewhere else before I could say anything more about it. I looked at Vanessa. She was looking at her plate. Later that night, in the car, I brought it up carefully because I already sensed it was a fragile thing to bring up at all. Diane seemed nice, I said. She's intense. You get used to her. She asked about my job like it was a punchline. Vanessa exhaled through her nose, the sound she made when she thought I was reading too much into something. She didn't mean anything by it. Maybe not. You're doing the thing, she said. What thing? The thing where you get quiet, and I have to guess what's wrong. She wasn't wrong about that, either. I did do that. I still do some. But I remember sitting in the passenger seat that night, watching the streetlights slide across the dashboard, thinking that she hadn't actually answered the question. She'd told me not to feel a certain way. She hadn't told me I was wrong to feel it. I let it go. That's what I did back then. I let a lot of things go, one at a time, telling myself none of them mattered enough on their own to be worth an argument. It kept happening in small rooms after that. Small dinners. Small comments. Nothing you could point at directly and say, this is the problem, which I think is exactly why it worked on me the way it did. Her friend group had shifted, too, the way friend groups do when somebody starts making real money. There was Ben from work, and his wife Qley who did something in finance I never fully understood, and a couple named Trevor and Amanda who'd bought a house in Highlands Ranch that they mentioned constantly, in the specific way people mention things they're still slightly nervous they can afford. We were at Trevor and Amanda's place for a dinner party in the spring, the kind with a charcuterie board and everyone standing around the kitchen island instead of sitting down, when Trevor asked what I did. Supply chain, I said. Analytics, mostly. Inventory forecasting. Right. Trevor said, nodding like I'd confirmed something he already suspected. That's what, warehouse stuff? Kind of. It's more the numbers behind it. Cool. He turned back toward Ben mid-sentence, already moving on, and started talking about a real estate deal Ben had closed that month, some number that made Amanda whistle low and impressed. I stood there holding a plastic cup of red wine, and I noticed, the way you notice a draft in a room before you notice the open window, that Vanessa hadn't said anything. She hadn't jumped in with he's really good at his job, or you should hear him explain the logistics side of it, the kind of thing partners say to fill a silence like that. She just kept slicing cheese off the board, focused on the knife, like she hadn't clocked the conversation at all. Maybe she hadn't. I've thought about that a lot since. Maybe it wasn't a decision. Maybe it was just a habit forming, quietly, the way habits do, the habit of not defending me, because some smaller, unspoken part of her had already started agreeing with the room. In the car afterward, she was checking her phone at a red light, scrolling through something on the group chat. Amanda's already sending pictures of the deck they're building, she said, half laughing. They put in a whole outdoor kitchen. Must be nice, I said. She looked over at me. You okay? Yeah, just tired. You've been saying that a lot lately. I've been tired a lot lately, I said, and that, at least, was true. She didn't push. The light turned green. We drove the rest of the way back to her apartment mostly quiet, the radio playing low, and I remember looking out the window at the mountains going dark in the distance and feeling something I didn't have a name for yet. Not anger. Something quieter and worse. Something closer to not enough. The layoffs hit my company in October, a first round that took out about 15% of the analytics department. I wasn't in it. I told myself that meant something, that I'd been safe, that I mattered there. But mostly it just meant I got to keep doing a job that had started to feel smaller every time I compared it to anything happening in Vanessa's world. I told her about the layoffs over dinner at my place, still nervous even though I hadn't lost anything. They cut Dana and 2 guys from my team, I said. Whole department's on edge. Are you okay? She asked. Then, before I could answer, is your job safe? I think so. For now. Okay. She nodded, chewing, already reaching for her phone when it buzzed. You should probably update your resume anyway, just in case. It was practical advice. Reasonable advice. Honestly, the kind any sensible person would give. But I remember sitting there with my fork halfway to my mouth, waiting for something that didn't come. She hadn't asked how I felt about it. She'd asked whether my resume was current. Yeah, I said. Probably should. She looked up from her phone, caught something in my face, and softened for a second. Hey, you're fine. You're good at what you do. I know. I just don't want you caught off guard, that's all. I know, Vanessa. She reached over and squeezed my hand. And for a moment it felt like the old version of us. The King Soopers rotisserie chicken version, the version that didn't calculate anything. Then her phone buzzed again, and she glanced down at it out of instinct, and I watched her face change, not dramatically, just a small flicker of interest, before she caught herself and set it face down on the table. Work stuff, she said. Everything okay? Yeah. Diane wants me at some fundraiser thing next month. A gala. Real estate association, developers, that kind of crowd. She said it casually, but there was something underneath the casualness, something almost like excitement she wasn't fully letting herself show. She said I should bring someone. Sounds fancy. It's mostly just people talking about themselves in expensive suits, she said, and we both laughed, and for a second the tension in the room actually eased. I'll come, I said, if you want me there. Of course I want you there. She said it fast, automatically, the way you answer a question you haven't actually thought about. I believed her. I think, in that moment, she even believed herself. But later that night, lying awake next to her, I found myself running the numbers the way I ran numbers at work. The pattern of who spoke and who got spoken over, who got asked what they did for a living and who got asked, gently, to update a resume. None of it added up to anything I could point at and call a fight. It just sat there in my chest, small and cold, a feeling I didn't have a name for yet. I didn't know it then, but that gala was going to be the night I finally got one. The fundraiser was at a hotel downtown, the kind with a lobby chandelier, so big it looked like it was compensating for something. Vanessa wore a black dress I hadn't seen before, and when I told her she looked great, she said thanks without really looking at me, already scanning the room for Diane. I felt out of place in about 4 seconds. Not because anyone said anything, just the math of it. My one blazer against a room full of tailored suits, my rented dress shoes squeaking a little on the marble. There's an open bar, Vanessa said. Just mingle a little, okay? I need to say hi to some people. Sure. She squeezed my arm and disappeared into the crowd, and I stood there holding a glass of wine I didn't really want, watching her work the room like she'd been doing it her whole life. She laughed at something a man in a navy suit said. She touched Diane's shoulder like they were old friends. She was good at this. Genuinely good. In a way that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with who she was becoming. I ended up talking to a guy named Rick who did zoning consulting, mostly because he was the only other person standing alone near the shrimp cocktail. It was fine. It was forgettable. 20 minutes of small talk about parking variances. I found Vanessa again near the bar, standing next to a guy I didn't recognize. Tall, easy smile, the kind of watch that costs more than my car. He had his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, not inappropriately, just casually, the way you'd touch someone you already felt comfortable around. Daniel, Vanessa said, and there was something in her voice I couldn't place yet. This is Grant. He's at Ridgeline Capital. We've worked on a couple deals together. Good to meet you, Grant said, shaking my hand with the kind of grip that felt practiced. You too. Vanessa's told me a lot about the market analysis you too. He stopped himself. Sorry. About her work. She's sharp. You must be proud. I am, I said, and I meant it, even standing there with something cold starting to move through my stomach. Grant excused himself a minute later, something about finding his colleague, and Vanessa watched him go for half a second longer than she needed to before turning back to me. He's a big deal, she said. Ridgeline's doing the financing on that mixed-use project downtown. If Diane lands that account. Sounds important. It is. She glanced toward the bar. You want another drink? I'm good. She nodded, distracted, already looking past me at someone else she needed to talk to. I stood there for a second, just watching her scan the room the way she'd been doing all night, and I thought about the King Soopers rotisserie chicken, the blanket, the mug with the chipped handle. That version of her had never once looked past me towards someone more important. I didn't know yet that the woman standing in front of me had already started, somewhere quiet inside herself, running a different set of numbers than the ones I was running. The second round of layoffs came in December, 3 days before Christmas, which felt like exactly the kind of detail nobody would believe if you told them it happened in a movie. They called it into a conference room in groups of 4. I remember the HR woman's voice shaking slightly as she read from a script about restructuring and difficult decisions, and I remember thinking, distantly, that she probably hated this part of her job more than any of us hated hearing it. 16 years of the company, gone in about 11 minutes, along with my desk, my badge, and a severance package that amounted to 6 weeks of pay. I called Vanessa from the parking lot before I even started my car. "They let me go," I said. There was a pause. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But I heard it. "Oh my God. Are you okay?" "I don't know yet. I think I'm still processing it." Okay, come over. I'll order dinner." She did order dinner. She was kind that night. Actually, she made space on the couch, let me talk through the numbness, told me it wasn't my fault, that the whole industry was contracting, that this happened to good people all the time. For a few hours, it felt like she was fully there with me. No scanning the room, no distracted glances at her phone. Then, around 10, while I was staring at the ceiling trying to figure out what Monday was even going to look like, she said, "You should call Grant." "What?" "Grant. From the gala. He knows a lot of people in logistics and operations, way outside my industry. It couldn't hurt. I don't really know him. I could introduce you properly. He's a good connector." That's kind of his whole thing. I understood, even as she said it, that this was meant kindly, that it was, in its own way, an act of care. She wanted to help, and this was the shape help took for her, a network, a warm introduction, a strategic next step. But something in me went quiet and small hearing her say his name in that context, like he already existed on some list of people more useful than me. "Maybe," I said. "Let me get through Christmas first." "Sure. Of course." We didn't talk about it again that night. But 2 weeks later, at another one of Trevor and Amanda's dinners, I watched Grant walk in with Diane, both of them laughing about something from a deal they'd closed, and Vanessa lit up in a way I hadn't seen her light up for me in months. Nothing happened. Nobody touched anyone they shouldn't have. It was just a look and a laugh that lasted a half-second too long, and the specific way she introduced him to Amanda as a good friend of ours now. The word ours landing strange in my chest, like it didn't include me the way it should have. I didn't say anything on the drive home. Neither did she. The radio filled the silence the whole way back, and somewhere around the second stoplight, I understood, quietly, without wanting to, that something had already shifted that neither of us was ready to say out loud yet. 3 weeks after that, on a Tuesday evening that started completely ordinary, Vanessa asked me to come by her apartment to talk. I knew before I got there. You know how you sometimes know a thing before anyone said it? The way the air in a room changes when a doctor walks in with a certain look on their face. It was like that. I sat in my car outside her building for almost 5 minutes before I went up, already understanding, in some low animal part of my brain, what was coming. She'd made tea. That detail has stuck with me more than almost anything else. She'd made 2 mugs of tea, mine and hers, like this was a conversation that deserved hospitality. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, sitting across from me at her kitchen table, both hands wrapped around her mug like she needed something to hold on to. "About us. About where things are going. Okay. I don't think we want the same things anymore." "What things, specifically?" She looked down at the table. "You've had a hard few months. I know that. And I'm not. This isn't about the layoff, not exactly. It's bigger than that." "Then what is it about?" She was quiet for a second, choosing her words the way she chose everything, carefully, like a woman building a case. "I need to be with someone who's moving forward. Building something. I've watched you get comfortable being stuck, and I don't think that's who I want to build a life with." "I lost my job 3 weeks ago, Vanessa." "I know. And I know that's not fair to say right now. But it's not just the job. It's been happening for a while. You know that." I didn't know that. That was the part that made it hard to argue with her. Some quiet, honest piece of me agreed with parts of what she was saying, even as the rest of me wanted to fight it. "Is this about Grant?" I asked. Something flickered across her face. Not guilt exactly. More like she'd been caught holding a thought she hadn't fully admitted to herself yet. "It's not about Grant specifically, but it's about what he represents." She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she stood up, walked to the counter, and came back with my house key, her spare, the one on the little silver ring I'd given her, and set it down on the table between us. "I think it's better if we're honest with each other," she said. "I need someone who's already where I'm trying to go, not someone I have to wait for." I looked at the key for a long moment. "Someday," she said, and here it was. The line, delivered quietly, almost gently, which somehow made it worse than if she'd shouted it. Someday you'll understand why I chose someone more successful. I didn't say anything for a second. I picked up the key, turned it once in my fingers, then reached into my pocket and set her spare, the one to her own apartment, down on the table in its place. Okay, I said. 3 years, and that was the whole of what I had to say. She looked at me like she'd been bracing for something bigger. An argument. Tears. Anything with more shape to it than one quiet word. I stood up, thanked her for the tea I hadn't touched, and let myself out. My apartment felt different that night, though nothing in it had actually changed. Same couch. Same radiator that clanked when the heat kicked on. Same chipped blue mug still sitting in the cabinet where it had sat for 2 years, because somehow, in all the back and forth of who kept what, nobody had ever remembered to take it back. I found myself staring at that mug longer than made any sense. Marcus showed up the next day with a case of beer and a pizza, which was his version of a wellness check. You eating? He asked, setting the pizza box on my counter. I'm eating. You look like hell. Thanks, man. He sat across from me at the small kitchen table, cracked open a beer, and didn't say anything for a while, which was unusual for Marcus. He wasn't a quiet guy by nature. You want to talk about it, or you want to just watch the game? He finally asked. Game, I said. We watched most of the first half in silence, and somewhere around halftime, without really planning to, I started talking. Not about the breakup exactly. About the smaller stuff. The gala. The way she'd said we've worked on a couple deals together like Grant was already woven into her sentences before I'd even fully registered him as a threat. The way nobody in that friend group had ever asked me a single follow-up question about my job, not once, in 3 years. You know what's messed up? Marcus said, staring at the TV. You're describing 3 years of small stuff. Little things. And every single one of them, on its own, sounds like nothing. I know. That's the part that'll mess with your head. It wasn't one big thing. You can't point to one big thing and say, there, that's why it ended. It's gonna feel like you're making something out of nothing, even when you're not. He wasn't wrong. In the weeks that followed, I caught myself doing exactly that. Replaying conversations, trying to find the one moment where everything tipped, and never quite finding it, because there wasn't one. There were 100 small moments, each one so minor it barely registered, until one day they added up to a woman handing me back my own key across a kitchen table. I started sleeping badly. I left the TV on most nights while I made dinner, just to have another voice in the apartment. I noticed the toothbrush that used to sit next to mine was gone. She'd taken it back weeks before we officially ended, which meant some part of her had already been leaving long before she said the words out loud. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I didn't do anything dramatic or cathartic or the kind of thing you'd see in a movie. I mostly just existed for a while, in an apartment that felt too quiet, next to a mug I couldn't make myself throw away, wondering, in the specific, low-grade way grief sits with you when nobody died, when nothing was technically wrong, when you're just a guy who got told he wasn't enough by someone who used to make you tea, whether she was right, whether I really had gotten comfortable being stuck. That question followed me into January, into February, into a version of myself I didn't recognize yet and had no idea was already starting, slowly, without my permission, to change. Nobody tells you that healing mostly looks like laundry. I started running in February, not because I suddenly cared about my health, but because I woke up one Saturday at 6 a.m. with nothing to do and no reason to lie there anymore. I put on shoes I hadn't worn in a year and went out into the cold before I could talk myself out of it. I made it 11 minutes before I had to walk the rest of the way home, hands on my knees at a crosswalk, embarrassed in front of nobody. I did it again the next day, and the day after that. It wasn't dramatic. There was no moment where I looked up at the sky and felt reborn. It was just 11 minutes, then 14, then 20, and somewhere in there I stopped thinking about Vanessa for the length of a run, which felt like the first real relief I'd had in weeks. I also started actually looking for work, instead of scrolling job boards at midnight and closing the tab. I updated my resume at my kitchen table on a Tuesday, the same table where she'd handed me back my key, which I hadn't fully clocked until I sat down and felt something tighten in my chest. I almost didn't notice I was doing better. That's the strange part. Growth doesn't announce itself. My mom called on a Sunday, like she did most Sundays, and asked how I was doing in that repetitive way she has when she's worried. You eating okay? You sleeping? You need anything? I'm okay, Mom. You sound tired. I've been running. There was a pause on the line, the kind that meant she was surprised. Running? Like exercise? Yeah. Well, another pause. Good. That's good, Daniel. It wasn't a big conversation, but something about saying it out loud, "I've been running," made it feel more real than it had felt just doing it alone every morning. I sent out 14 applications that week. 9 of them never responded. 2 sent automated rejections within a day. 1 asked for a phone screen that went nowhere. The last one, a smaller logistics tech company out in the tech corridor near the DDC area, sent back a short email asking if I could come in Thursday. I didn't tell anyone yet. I didn't want to jinx it, and honestly, some smaller part of me didn't want to say it out loud and then have to explain, later, that it hadn't worked out. The interview lasted 22 minutes, and I ruined it somewhere around minute 9. The woman interviewing me, a hiring manager named Sherry, seemed nice enough, asked reasonable questions, nodded along at my answers about inventory systems and demand forecasting. Then she asked the question I should have prepared for and hadn't. "So tell me about why you left your last position." I opened my mouth, and nothing organized came out. "There was a round of layoffs," I said. "Restructuring. It wasn't performance related." "True, all of it, but I said it too fast, too defensively, like I was arguing with someone who hadn't accused me of anything." "Of course," Sherry said. "That happens a lot right now, right?" "Yeah, it's been a tough market." I felt my face get warm. I've actually been doing a lot of skill building since then. Certifications, that kind of thing. I hadn't done any certifications. I don't know why I said it. It just came out, some panicked need to fill the silence with something that sounded like progress. She wrote something down. I couldn't read her face. The rest of the interview went fine, technically. I answered the actual job questions well. I knew the material. I'd done the work for 6 years. I wasn't lying about my competence. But I drove home knowing I'd blown it in some way I couldn't fully name. Some invisible test about whether I could talk about my own setback without flinching. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside my building for a while. I got my phone out and opened a new text message to Vanessa before I even fully registered what I was doing. "Bombed an interview today. Wish you were here to tell me it's not a big deal." I stared at it for almost a full minute. Then I deleted it, letter by letter, watching the cursor eat the words backward until the box was empty again. I called my mom instead. "You okay?" she asked, picking up on the second ring. "Bad interview," I said. "I don't think I got it." "You don't know that yet." "Mom, you don't," she said, firm in the way she got when she wasn't going to let me talk myself into something. "You went. You tried. That's more than sitting home doing nothing, which is what you were doing in December. It doesn't feel like much." "It's not supposed to feel like much yet," she said. "It's supposed to feel like much later, when you look back and realize you kept going even when it was hard. That's the whole thing, Daniel. That's the only thing anybody actually does." I didn't believe her completely, not that night. But I didn't delete the number for the company either, and 2 days later, when they sent a polite rejection email, I didn't fall apart the way I would have in November. I forwarded my resume to 2 more companies instead, one of them a smaller logistics tech startup I'd almost skipped because their website looked unfinished. That company was called Fieldbridge Logistics. I didn't know yet that it was going to change everything. Fieldbridge operated out of a converted warehouse space near the tech corridor, 12 employees, exposed brick, a ping-pong table nobody used because everyone was too busy. It felt smaller than my last job in every way except one. The work actually seemed to matter to the people doing it. I got the job in March. Junior operations analyst, a title lower than the one I'd had before, salary about $8,000 less than I'd been making at the distribution company. I took it anyway. Marcus asked me if that bothered me, taking a step down like that. "Not really," I told him, and meant it. "Feels different. Feels like it's actually mine." The first person who made an impression on me there was a woman named Priya Anand, a senior engineer who'd been with the company since it was 3 people in someone's garage. She had a way of looking at a spreadsheet like it was a puzzle instead of a chore, and she asked me more questions in my first week than anyone at my old job had asked me in 3 years. "Why do you think the reorder threshold is set where it is?" she asked me, on maybe my 4th day, pointing at a screen full of numbers. "Honestly, I think somebody guessed a while back and nobody's touched it since." She looked at me for a second, like I'd said something more interesting than I meant to. "Yeah, that's exactly what I think too." It became a small thing between us, the 2 of us noticing the parts of the system nobody else had bothered to question. She didn't flatter me. She wasn't warm in an obvious way, but she listened, actually listened, the way people listen when they think what you're saying might matter. "You're sharper than your resume made you sound," she told me once, a few weeks in, not unkindly. "Why'd you undersell yourself in the interview?" "I didn't think I had much to sell," I said, half joking. She didn't laugh. That's a you problem, not a numbers problem. I thought about that for a long time after she said it. Nobody had put it that plainly to me before. Not Vanessa, not Marcus, not my mom. Just a woman I barely knew, telling me, without any particular emotion attached to it, that the gap between what I could do and what I thought I could do was mine to close. I started staying a little later some nights, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to understand the whole system, not just my corner of it. I started speaking up in meetings I would have sat quietly through 6 months earlier. Small things. Nothing anyone would have made a movie out of. But something in me was waking back up, slowly, the way a limb wakes up after you've been sitting on it too long. Uncomfortable at first, then steady. By June, I'd found something. I'd been quietly tracking a pattern in FieldBridge's shipping delays for about 6 weeks. A bottleneck buried 3 layers down in how the system routed orders through a particular regional hub. It wasn't glamorous work. It was the kind of thing that could easily have stayed a private observation in a spreadsheet nobody read. I brought it to Priya first, half expecting her to tell me I was overthinking it. She didn't. She went quiet for almost a full minute, scrolling through the numbers I'd pulled together, and then looked up at me. This could save us close to $200,000 a year if it scales the way I think it will. I wasn't sure if I was seeing it right. You're seeing it right. She closed the laptop. You need to bring this to Dave. I figured you'd bring it up. You've got more standing here than I do. I could, she said. But it's your work. If I bring it up, it's my idea with your name attached. If you bring it up, it's yours. She looked at me steadily. You should stop doing that. Handing your work to other people to carry for you. I didn't answer right away. Something about the way she said it landed harder than she probably meant it to. I presented it myself the following Tuesday, in a conference room with exactly 6 people in it. Nowhere near the size of the rooms Vanessa used to walk into without blinking. My hands were a little unsteady clicking through the slides. I stumbled once, lost my place for a second when Dave asked a question I hadn't fully anticipated about implementation costs. I didn't have a perfect answer. I told him I'd need a week to model it properly instead of guessing. Fair, Dave said. I'd rather you say that than make something up. Nobody clapped. Nobody made a speech. Dave just nodded, said good work, let's move on this. And the meeting continued to the next item on the agenda like what had just happened wasn't a big deal. But walking out of that conference room, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I wanted to admit. Not pride exactly, not yet, but something close to it. The quiet, unglamorous sense of having done something real, with my own name on it, standing in a room and not flinching when someone pushed back. Priya caught up to me in the hallway. Told you, she said. You didn't tell me anything. You just made me do it myself. Same thing, she said, and kept walking toward her desk before I could argue. I sat back down at my own desk a few minutes later, looked at the numbers on my screen, the same reorder thresholds, the same shipping data I'd been quietly living inside for months, and felt something shift, small but real, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't realized was stuck. I didn't know it yet, but that presentation, unremarkable as it felt in the room, was the first domino in a line that would eventually put my face on a television screen in an airport terminal, in front of the one person I never expected to be standing there watching it happen. The bottleneck fix scaled better than anyone expected. By September, FieldBridge had rolled it out across 2 more regional hubs, and the savings Priya had estimated back in June turned out to be conservative. Dave dropped the word junior from my title that same month, almost as an afterthought, scribbled into an email about payroll updates like it wasn't worth a separate conversation. It was worth more to me than he probably realized. A month later, a business reporter from a regional trade publication called Denver Commerce Weekly reached out about a story on logistics tech startups adapting to supply chain disruptions. Dave gave her 3 names to talk to. Mine was one of them. The interview itself was almost anticlimactic. I sat in a small conference room with bad lighting, answered questions about the routing system for maybe 25 minutes, tried not to say them too many times, and figured that would be the end of it. A small piece in a trade publication nobody outside the industry would ever read. It wasn't the end of it. The trade piece got picked up by a business blog with a bigger following, and from there, somehow, a producer at a regional business news show reached out to FieldBridge asking if anyone would be willing to do a longer, on-camera segment about unconventional supply chain solutions in a post-pandemic economy. Dave asked if I wanted to do it, or if he should. You built it, he said. Feels like it should be you. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. They filmed it on a Thursday in November, a longer sit-down interview than I expected, Almost 40 minutes of footage they'd eventually cut down to about 6. I wore the one good blazer I owned. The same one, actually, from the gala over a year earlier, though I didn't think about that until much later. I talked about the reorder threshold nobody had touched in years. I talked about Priya pushing me to present it myself instead of letting her carry it. I didn't talk about Vanessa at all. There was no reason to. She wasn't part of this story anymore. Not really. Except in the quiet way she still lived somewhere underneath most of my decisions, whether I wanted to admit that or not. The segment aired in early December on a regional business channel, then got picked up and repackaged by a national business network for a syndicated afternoon slot. The kind that runs on a loop in airports and hotel lobbies and doctor's office waiting rooms across the country. Nobody at Fieldbridge made a big deal out of it. Dave sent a company-wide email with a link and a proud of this team line, and that was mostly it. I didn't think about where else it might end up playing. I had a work trip scheduled for mid-December anyway. Fieldbridge was opening a smaller satellite office in Phoenix, and Dave wanted me out there before the holidays slowed everything down. I booked a mid-morning flight out of Denver International, packed a bag the night before, and didn't think, even once, about televisions and departure lounges. It was the second week of December, almost 11 months to the day since I'd stood in Vanessa's kitchen and set a key down on her table. I got to the airport with more time to spare than I needed, the way you do when a work trip makes you slightly more careful about everything. Security took less time than usual. I found my gate in Concourse C, bought a coffee I didn't really want just to have something to hold, and sat down to wait. The lounge was crowded in the specific, low-grade way airport terminals always are. A toddler somewhere crying in short bursts. A couple arguing quietly near the charging stations. A man on a video call talking too loud about a spreadsheet. I had my laptop open, half reviewing notes for the Phoenix setup, half just watching people move. That was when I saw her. 40 feet away, near a different gate, Vanessa was standing beside a rolling suitcase, phone in one hand, the other hand resting lightly on Grant's arm while he checked something on his own phone. She looked good, put together, the way she always managed to look, hair different than I remembered, a coat that looked expensive. But there was something in the way she stood next to him, some small distance in her posture I recognized without being able to name it right away, a kind of politeness where affection used to sit uncomplicated. I don't know if she saw me first, or if I saw her first. It doesn't really matter. What I remember is that neither of us moved. We just existed in the same terminal, 40 feet apart, two people who used to split a rotisserie chicken under one blanket, now separated by exactly the kind of ordinary distance you'd expect between strangers who happened to be flying out of the same city on the same morning. My stomach did something complicated. Not the sharp, immediate pain I would have expected a year earlier. Something quieter. A kind of recognition, maybe, that this version of me, sitting in an airport with a coffee he didn't need, halfway through building something real, wasn't the man who'd stood in her kitchen and picked up a house key without arguing. I didn't wave. She didn't wave. Grant said something to her, and she laughed, a short, automatic laugh, and looked back down at her phone. I went back to my laptop, or tried to. I read the same paragraph of notes 4 times without absorbing any of it. Then the gate agent's announcement system crackled overhead, boarding groups beginning to call, and above the row of seats near my gate, one of the mounted televisions running the afternoon business channel cut to a familiar segment. I recognized it before I fully processed what I was looking at. My own face, slightly younger looking on camera than I felt, sitting in that small conference room, talking about a reorder threshold nobody had touched in years. The volume was too low to hear from where I sat, but the Charon scrolled clearly enough beneath the footage. Daniel Reyes, Operations Analyst, Fieldbridge Logistics. How one overlooked system fix saved a company millions. I felt my whole body go still in a way that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with pure, animal surprise. I hadn't known it was still running in syndication. I hadn't known it would be playing here, of all places, today, of all days. I looked up, and across the terminal, I saw Vanessa's head turn toward the same screen. She saw it before she saw me. That's what I noticed first. The way her expression shifted at the television, not at my face across the room. A small furrow of recognition crossing her features like she was trying to place someone she half remembered from another life. Then her eyes moved from the screen to the row of seats near my gate, and she found me. For a moment, neither of us did anything. The terminal kept moving around us. A boarding announcement, a stroller wheel squeaking past, someone laughing too loud into a phone, And in the middle of all that ordinary noise, Vanessa Cole stood 40 feet away from me with her hand still resting on Grant's arm, staring at a stranger's face on 6 different televisions that used to be mine 3 years ago, before any of this happened. She said something to Grant. I couldn't hear it, but I watched him glance toward the screen, then toward me, his expression polite and slightly confused, the look of a man being told something he didn't have full context for. Vanessa left him standing there and walked toward me. I stood up without fully deciding to. My laptop stayed open on the seat. Daniel, she said, stopping a few feet away, closer than I expected, close enough that I could see she genuinely hadn't planned any of this. Is that you? Yeah, I said. It's an old segment. I didn't know it was still running. You work for? She glanced back at the screen, reading the cheering again like she needed to confirm it wasn't a mistake. Fieldbridge. That's the logistics company doing the expansion into Phoenix, isn't it? I read about them. That's the one. I'm flying out there this morning, actually, setting up the new office. She looked at me for a long moment, something moving behind her eyes that I couldn't fully read. Not quite regret, not quite pride, something more complicated sitting somewhere between the two. You look good, she said, quieter now. Really good. Thanks. You too. There was a pause, the kind neither of us knew how to fill. Behind her, Grant had wandered a few steps closer, not quite joining the conversation, checking his watch with the particular patience of a man who sensed this wasn't about him. I didn't know you were still doing supply chain stuff, Vanessa said, and there was something almost apologetic buried in how she said it, like she was realizing, out loud, how little she'd actually followed after everything ended. I thought maybe you'd. She stopped herself. You thought I'd stayed stuck, I said. Not angry, just naming it, the way you'd name a fact that had stopped hurting enough to require careful handling. Her face changed, just slightly. I didn't mean it like that. I know, and I did know. There wasn't any venom left in me to put behind the words. It's okay, Vanessa. It was a long time ago. She looked at the screen one more time, my face still frozen mid-sentence in some cut of the interview, then back at me, standing in front of her in an airport blazer that was slightly nicer than the one from the gala, holding a coffee I still didn't need. I'm glad it worked out for you, she said, and it sounded like she meant it, in whatever complicated way a person can mean something like that. Yeah, I said. Me too. The gate agent called my boarding group. I glanced at my ticket, then back at her. That's me, I said. Right. Of course. She stepped back, making room, the way you do for someone whose flight is more urgent than your conversation. Good luck in Phoenix. Thanks. Take care, Vanessa. I picked up my bag and my laptop and walked toward the gate, and I didn't look back to see whether she watched me go, or whether she turned back toward Grant, or whether her eyes drifted once more to the television screens still playing my face on a loop above the waiting area. Some things you don't need to see to understand they happened. I found my row, put my bag in the overhead bin, and settled into the window seat. And it wasn't until the plane started backing away from the gate that my hands finally stopped feeling strange, that faint electric unsteadiness fading the way it does after something big passes through you and moves on. I kept waiting to feel triumphant. I think some part of me expected that, had almost been saving it up without realizing, some fantasy version of this moment I didn't know I'd been carrying since the night she handed me back my key. I thought seeing her see me, really see me, on those screens, in that terminal, was supposed to feel like winning something. It didn't, though. Not exactly. What I felt, watching Denver shrink beneath the wing as the plane climbed, was something quieter than victory, something closer to relief. Because somewhere in the last 11 months, I couldn't point to the exact day, any more than I could point to the exact day things had started falling apart with her. I'd stopped needing her to see any of it. The running, the interview, Priya telling me to stop handing my work to other people to carry, Dave nodding and saying good work, let's move on like it wasn't a big deal, which was somehow the thing that had convinced me it was. None of that had happened for her. It had happened because I finally stopped waiting for someone else's permission to believe I mattered. I thought about the blue mug, still sitting in my kitchen cabinet back in Denver, chipped handle and all. I still hadn't thrown it away. I don't know if I ever will. Not because I was still holding on to her, but because some part of a person's life doesn't need to be erased just because it ended. It can just sit there, quiet, a small true thing that happened, taking up exactly as much space as a mug on a shelf, and nothing more. Somewhere over New Mexico, the flight attendant came by with drinks, and I asked for coffee I actually wanted this time, and I looked out at the clouds breaking apart below the wing, patches of desert showing through in long orange stretches. I didn't know what Vanessa was thinking, walking back to Grant at that gate. I didn't know if that moment would sit with her the way it would sit with me, or if it would fade into the ordinary noise of a December morning by the time she landed wherever she was going. It wasn't my business anymore, and understanding that, really understanding it, not just saying it, felt like its own quiet kind of finish line. The plane leveled out. I opened my laptop, pulled up my notes for the Phoenix office, and got back to work, because that's what the rest of the story actually was. Not an airport terminal, not 6 televisions, just a guy with a job he was good at, flying somewhere new, finally built out of something steadier than anyone else's definition of what he was supposed to become.